Hello, this is Professor Kalabata, and I'm going to run through some themes and concepts for Module 1. So we're going to be talking about personality types, and we're going to also talk about something called the persona and the shadow. Some of you, if you've had an introductory psychology class before, you might have run into some of these ideas. But you don't have to have taken a psychology class, and I don't expect you to know these terms yet or to be experts on them or anything. Let's just run through them. So let's see. Okay, so Carl Jung, I know his name starts with a J, but it's pronounced young, like he's not old, he's young. But he was a Swiss psychiatrist who founded the field of analytical psychology. And we'll be talking a lot about his ideas. I don't know if you've run into him in some of your other classes, but his ideas were very important to the field of psychology and also to lots of other fields like the study of literature, the study of mythology. So we'll be talking about him a bit in this class, and I wouldn't be surprised if you run into him again in your other classes. So let's just talk about these two people really quick. There's Catherine Briggs and Isabel Briggs Myers. They're mother and daughter, and they were a mother and daughter team who took the ideas of Carl Jung and they used them to create a system of personality types to put different people into personality categories based on their psychological and emotional tools that they use to interact with the world. So let's just look at what they created. So this is the system they created. I don't know if you've ever seen this before. Again, this is a pretty popular system, a personality system that if you haven't run into it yet, I wouldn't be surprised if you run into it again sometime in the future. Maybe if you've never seen it before, this page looks kind of complicated, but it's actually kind of a simple system. So let's just run through some of the basic ideas. You can see the numbers here on the left, and then on the right, there's 1, 2, 3, 4. And each number has 2 words. So number 1 has extroversion and introversion, and then number 2 has sensing and intuition, and number 3 has thinking and feeling, and number 4 has judging and perceiving. And each word has an initial. So for extroversion, they use an E. For introversion, they use I. For sensing, they use an S. For intuition, they use an N, because of course, remember, the I was already taken by introversion with the first pair of words. The third pair of words are thinking and feeling, so we have a T and an F. And then the fourth pair of words are judging and perceiving, so we have a J and a P. And the whole idea with this system is that you go through each of the 4 pairs and you choose one of those 2 words. So there's 8 possible words, and you come up with 4 words, and those 4 words together define what personality type you're going to have. I guess I'll say a couple things about this. I've heard some people in the field of psychology talk about this, and they say it's actually kind of interesting. You do this self-analysis to try to understand what personality type you are, and it can help you get to know yourself better. It can also help you. People use it in lots of different ways. They use it with counseling. They use it with therapy. Sometimes people use this with career planning, like you can figure out what type of personality you have, and it can help you figure out what type of job you want to have. So it can be very useful. But, we should take it with a grain of salt. How accurate is it? It can be. I'll tell you, I've done this, and it's been pretty enlightening. I think it's fun. It's interesting. If you go on the internet and you type the Myers-Briggs personality type into Google, you'll get a lot of pages that pop up. People have done this with, for instance, television shows, where they get all the characters for a television show and they put all the characters into the Myers-Briggs personality types. or movies, the Marvel movies, Star Wars, or popular television shows like Game of Thrones. they'll, people on the internet, they'll take all the characters from the movie or the television show, and they'll put the characters into these personality types. So if you go to Google and you Google this, you'll probably type in Myers-Briggs personality type Star Wars or Marvel superheroes or something, and you'll see charts with with all the superheroes or all the Star Wars characters, and they'll be on a chart where it'll show the personality type, the Myers-Briggs personality type of all the Star Wars characters. So it's kind of amusing and kind of fun. But you can see how the system works. You kind of go through this and you ask these 4 questions. And in fact, you can see this in some of the articles we read. Let me get one of our articles up here. How about which article? This is the article, Consider Your Personality Type Before Going Back to School, written by Sandra Krebs Hirsch and Jane A.G. Kisei. And I don't know if I'm pronouncing her name correctly. And let's see here. Sorry, I had an email pop up on my screen. But okay, you can see on the first page of this article, here's the four pairs, and this article gives us the questions. Like for instance, with the first pair, extroversion and introversion. To be energized in your learning, are you more likely to respond like an extrovert or an introvert? And you see under each word, there's a list of these qualities. So these are the qualities that make an extroverted person, and over here on the other side, these are the qualities that make an introverted person. And what you want to do is you want to go through each of these points on this list and tell yourself, yes, I do this, or kind of, no, I don't really do that. And don't think about it too much. Just go with your gut feeling. And you don't necessarily have to agree with everything on one list. You might have maybe 3 extroverted qualities and 1 introverted quality. That's fine. It's more about which way do you lean more than the other one. So just go through these lists, and you can see, let's look at the second one. As you are learning, what kind of material information do you find more compelling? And so here's sensing and intuition. So on the sensing side, there's a list. I like to learn practical information that taps into my 5 senses. I like to work with clear, specific, and accurate information. It keeps going. On the intuition side, I prefer to learn insightful information that taps into my imagination. I prefer to work with global patterns. So look at those lists and maybe check them off. Which ones do you think describe you more accurately? And then come up with a combination. You'll come up with four words that define your personality type, and then go back to the chart and look at your personality type. And it's, again, it's kind of fun. I'll just run through the qualities of some of these words really quick. Let me go back to my PowerPoint presentation here. Okay, so first of all, extroversion and introversion, I'll say something about that. So the whole idea of extroversion and introversion, somebody who's extroverted, I guess maybe, you might think of them as kind of being the life of the party, but not necessarily somebody who's always the life of the party, just somebody who's a bit more social. In fact, I think the textbook definition of this is somebody who feels that they recharge or they get more energy by socially interacting with other people. An introverted personality type is somebody who they feel like they recharge and they get more energy by spending time alone. So something else I've heard some people in the field of psychology talk about is that the other words in the other 3 pairs are, I guess what? They might tell you a little bit more about your personality type than the first pair, that is extroversion and introversion. And the reason I've heard some people say that is because people can switch back and forth very easily between extroverted behavior and introverted behavior. So somebody might have a very outgoing extroverted personality type where they recharge and they get a lot of energy by socially interacting with other people. But then if that person is suddenly in an environment where they feel uncomfortable or it's an unfamiliar environment, then they can suddenly exhibit very introverted personality behavior. Whereas somebody who tends to spend most of their time being introverted, they want to spend most of their time by themselves, they recharge and get more energy by spending time by themselves, then that person, if they're in an environment where they suddenly feel really confident and really happy, they can suddenly switch and they become a very extroverted personality type. So there are life situations and environmental circumstances that can cause us to switch back and forth between extroverted personality types and introverted personality behavior. So I've heard some people in the field of psychology say maybe figuring out if you're extroverted or introverted doesn't matter as much as the other words. But okay, but it's still it's still useful. And remember what I said a couple minutes ago. I mean, this is a fun little test, but take it with a grain of salt. The sensing and intuition pair. The word sensing, the way it's being used here is it means somebody who tends to interact with the world using their senses, meaning they react to what they see and what they hear. That means that person's going to be very sort of matter of fact, whereas intuition is seeing something but then drawing a larger conclusion based on what they saw. So they tend to be focused on a big picture. They see something and then they think, what does it mean? As opposed to the person who is the sensing person is the person who they see something and they don't really want to draw a larger conclusion from it. They just want to relate to what they see and what they hear. Thinking and feeling. Thinking and feeling is interesting because, well, you know what? I think it's what I've heard somebody say before. An example that somebody used before was, like, for instance, if there's an event like a bar fight event where there's a fight between a couple of people in a bar. And the way I've heard it described to me is that, for instance, somebody who focuses a lot on sensing as opposed to intuition, they're probably going to give the most accurate description of what happened, right? They'll describe this person came in, and then 2 minutes later that person came in, and then this person said that, and this person said that, and then there was pushing, and they're going to have sort of a grocery list of descriptions of what they saw. Somebody who focuses a lot on thinking, they're going to focus on a lot on the I guess what the shouting means, how it communicates disagreement. They're going to focus on I guess, how do we describe thinking? It's like the person who's thinking instead of feeling, they're focusing a lot on value statements, on what does it say there? It could be described as reasonable or level-headed. They make decisions in an impersonal way. So the thinking person is thinking a lot about what it means. The fact that people were yelling at each other, what does it communicate? And then the feeling person, they're going to focus more on, how do we describe that? The feeling person is going to focus more on value judgments. They're going to look at the bar fight and they're going to start coming to opinions about what's good and bad, how horrible that those people would do that, how terrible that they're doing it in a public place, or even the place itself is some sort of this is a place where bad people hang out. So the feeling person is going to make a lot of value judgments. With the person who's more intuitive, they're using a lot of intuition. They're going to they're going to look at what they see and they're going to use it to try to draw a larger conclusion about things. Uh, what is this? What is the larger picture happening here? Maybe the fact that there was a bar fight. The people fighting, they must be in some way connected with each other in a way that goes beyond the immediate circumstances happening right now. There must be some larger story here. They must have some bad blood with each other before they even came into the bar. And what is the long-term effect going to be? What are the long-term implications of what's happening? Somebody's going to end up in the hospital, and one of these men is going to end up in the hospital. He's going to lose his job, and his wife and kids are going to suffer because of this. So the person who's more focused on intuition is focusing on the larger picture. So anyways, you can see how these pairs, they kind of form opposites with each other. So for instance, the sensing person, like I said, they focus on what their senses are seeing. Well, this happened, then this happened, then this happened, whereas the intuition person is looking at what happened, but they're trying to draw a larger picture. So, and then the last pair, judging and perceiving. I guess judging, they tend to plan a lot. They prefer to they try to be efficient with their time, and they want to get things done. Whereas the person who is perceiving is focused on what does the experience feel like in the moment. So they're more likely to be more flexible with rules and deadlines. The judging person wants to make a plan and they want to get it done. The perceiving person wants to experience it in the moment, and they're willing to do things in a flexible way in order to maximize the feeling of the moment. So anyways, I guess we could, I wanted to run through some of those words really quick and kind of just talk about them for a few minutes, but you get the idea. I mean, there's 4 pairs, and you ask yourself these questions. Each pair has a question, and then you go down that list of qualities that define each word, and you try to decide which of those qualities describe you more than the other list of qualities. And then you come up with 4 letters, and it gives you your personality type. And you see the 16 combinations here in the middle of the diagram. Now, I'll just finish the next slide. There's a couple of other things I want to connect to the articles. Now, this guy, Carl Jung, he had this recurring idea that human beings have different qualities in them that are always struggling for balance. And 2 of the qualities we're going to talk about, one of them is called persona and the other is called the shadow. And when you read the articles, you'll see that one of our articles talks explicitly about the persona and the other one talks about the shadow. So just really quick, the persona, what that means, the way Carl Jung is using it here is he uses the word persona to refer to the mask that we wear when we are interacting with other people. It's the image that we want to project to the outside world. So that's why he called it a public mask. It is often not an accurate representation of who we actually are, but it's a representation of what we think that we are, and also what other people think we are. And so it tends to, what does it say there? It tends to build traits that others find acceptable, while hiding traits that others feel are unacceptable. So it's the public image that we want to project to the world, and also to ourselves, not just to other people, but it's us communicating to ourselves, this is the type of person I think I am, or this is the type of person I want to be. And that person is usually somebody that is considered acceptable to other people around us and to ourselves. The shadow is, I guess we could say, a mirror image of the persona. These 2 things, the persona and the shadow, are mirror images of each other. So the shadow is the qualities that are the opposite of the persona. And whereas the persona tends to be this usually rather superficial and rather pretentious outside image, the shadow is compensating for that. So remember, Carl Jung had this idea of things struggling to have balance. And so the shadow is embodying the qualities that we are trying to cover up with the persona. Remember, the persona is a mask, so it's covering something. And the thing that it's covering is the shadow. And the stuff underneath the mask is the stuff that we are afraid of, or that we're ashamed of, or that we're angry about. It's something inside ourselves that we are unsatisfied with, or that we don't like. And as a result, we deny, or we suppress it. Whatever it is inside of ourselves that we're unaware of, or that we're in denial about, or that we're trying to hide or repress, that is the stuff that is the shadow that is being covered up by the persona. And so we can kind of look at one and the other. We can see the persona, and we can kind of figure out what the shadow must be inside the person. And so there's this idea of, here's the last slide. You see over here on the left side, I put these two terms here. Oh, whoops, I'm screwing up the terms. But there's a line here that goes through the middle of this slide. And on the top of the line, you can see that this is what represents the conscious mind. And on the bottom of the line, here's the subconscious mind. So again, it's if you take an introductory psychology class, you'll learn all about this. And for our purposes, we're just doing a very quick layman's understanding of these, so we can use some of these ideas to write an essay assignment in Module 1. But, if you took like an introductory psychology class, you'd probably learn about how in the late 1800s, early 1900s, a bit more than 100 years ago now, there were people like Sigmund Freud and also Carl Jung. There were these people alive during that time, late 1800s, early 1900s, who were developing all these ideas. And I think a lot of people, modern society just sort of takes it for granted now that there's this conscious mind and subconscious mind, that there's stuff going on the surface that we're aware of. And then there's a lot of stuff going on inside the human brain that we're just not consciously aware of. We take it for granted now. I think that's sort of that concept of there being a conscious mind and a subconscious mind has just sort of seeped into the culture. And even if you're not a psychology major and you haven't studied this, I think most people understand, what the term subconscious mind means, even if you're not expected to give a textbook definition. But it's important to remember that back 100 years ago, or a little bit more than 100 years ago, this was a very controversial idea. The idea that there's stuff going on inside your brain that you are not consciously aware of. The idea that the brain is, and here's where it starts getting, it's an interesting cross-section between both science and philosophy, because it gets very philosophical. The human brain is a physical object that is self-aware. It has consciousness. And a lot of the stuff going on inside the human brain is stuff that the human brain is not consciously aware of. So the human brain is doing stuff that the human brain is not aware of, and so you take a psychology class and you can go around in circles talking about that with yourself. But I put up here on the top of this slide, let me maximize the slide here. But a famous philosopher, Friedrich Nietzsche, said, "We are strangers to ourselves." And he was right? It takes work to get to know ourselves. That there's stuff going on inside our brain that we are not consciously aware of. And you can see here, I put in this diagram. Up here we have the persona, and there's a couple of things with the persona here I want to talk about. And then there's the shadow down here. The shadow, the sort of mirror reflection of the persona that's in the subconscious mind. And let me just say a couple of things. I'll go back to one of the articles again. So if you look at, let me see here. So if you look at, we were talking about the personality types. At the beginning of this article, this is the one that's entitled "Consider Your Personality Type Before Going Back to School." We were looking at this one a minute ago. In the very beginning, the first couple of paragraphs, a senior clergy person, so somebody in the clergy, right, somebody who works in a church, Told me that he was going back to school next year. I expect to take my first accounting class, broaden my skills. Clergy are like small business owners. We're in charge of so much more than the spiritual side of our organizations. Besides, I'm looking for a challenge. Right? Another minister, quite young, also decided to take business classes. I want to get deeper into accounting. While accounting was my undergraduate degree, the master's coursework will assure me that I really do know what I am doing. So further on down, personality type helped both ministers see that they were following natural paths of development as outlined by Carl Jung. The young clergy person still wanted to establish herself in her chosen profession, the work of the first half of life in type terminology. Her education choice closely aligned with what she saw as her natural gifts. The older clergy person had spent the first half of his life concentrating on maintaining harmony, empathizing with others, and focusing on values. He sought to round out that focus, described below as the feeling function, by turning into in midlife to logics, systems, and critical analysis, described below as the realm of the thinking person. Okay, so you see, it's interesting how these two clergy people, like for instance the older clergy person that talked about in the second half of this paragraph right here. It sounds like if he took this Myers-Briggs test, what did it say? He would be certainly one of these feeling types because he focused a lot, it sounded like he focused a lot on counseling, empathizing with people, helping people through emotional issues. But then in his second half of life, he was trying to discover a new part of himself. He wanted to do something that didn't have as much to do with counseling and dealing with people's feelings, and he wanted to go into like systems analysis and logic and working with numbers. The other person was focusing on accounting, right? And so that brings up another point here. That's an important point. So we were talking about the conscious mind and the subconscious mind and the persona and the shadow. So it's like the clergy person who started off being a very heavily feeling dominant person. So up here on the surface, he's a very a very feeling dominant person. But remember, the Myers-Briggs test, it doesn't say what you are and what you are not. What it says is everybody has all of these tools, but the Myers-Briggs test is testing to see which of these tools do you prefer to use. You have all the tools, but there are some tools that you use more frequently than others. So it's not whether or not you have this tool and you don't have that tool. It's more about that you have all the tools, but there are some tools that you use more frequently. And so the tools that you use more frequently are up here in the conscious mind, and the tools that you use less frequently are down here in the subconscious shadow. And so you can see that clergy example where we have this person working in a church who throughout much of his life is a very feeling dominant person up here in his conscious mind. And there were these other qualities down here in his subconscious shadow that were very, very sensing, very, in fact, what did it say? It said, the thinking and sensing were more in his subconscious shadow mind. And later on in life, what he started to do was he started to discover some of these things that were buried deeper inside his mind that he hadn't really tapped into before. And when he tapped into this opposite mirror image of his conscious mind, it released all this new stuff. It released all this potential. He discovered all these new things about himself. And that's something else that Carl Jung talked about, and lots of people have talked about since Carl Jung, that if you can spend time to try to get to know yourself, to tap into that stuff that's going on deeper inside your mind, in the subconscious level, in the shadow, and you try to integrate these two things a little bit more. It's like there's two people inside of you. There's one person on the surface, and there's another person, a different person, underneath the surface. And if you can get to know that person under the surface and you can integrate these two people a little bit more, what happens is there tends to be a release of all this positive energy. And you can see it in this article. In this article, this person who was in the clergy, who spent much of his life focusing on, was very, like I said, very feeling dominant, but discovered this other thinking quality of himself. And so he was a person who had focused a lot on counseling throughout his life, who suddenly figured out maybe he likes systems analysis and accounting. And so, I guess it's interesting. Take the Myers-Briggs test and figure out what your personality type is. And that sort of tells you what's going on here on the surface. But then what you want to do is you want to look at the opposite of that personality type. So let me go back to the other slide and I'll tell you my own personal experience with this. So I took this test and I'm an INTJ. I'm up here in the upper right. Innovative, independent, strategic, logical, reserved, insightful. Yeah, very introverted, in my own head a lot. I mean, I'm a college professor, thinking a lot, very intuitive. Whoops, wrong slide. Let me go back to the other slide. Very intuitive, very in my head a lot of the time. And when I look at the opposite, my opposite would be the ESFP down here. So very extroverted, very sensing, very living in the moment, very sort of down to earth and practical rather than being having my head up in the clouds. And so you can see, I mean, this is my surface up here, INTJ, and this would be, I guess, Carl Jung would say my subconscious ESFP, right? These are the qualities that are a little bit more deeply buried inside myself that are there. They are there, but I don't use them, or I don't use them as much as I do the INTJ. And so it's interesting to look at that mirror self, that mirror image of yourself, and in order to try to understand what are the things that are more deeply buried inside yourself that could release a lot of positive energy if you tried to integrate these two things together. So it's just interesting that you see that happening in this article with people discovering new things about themselves. There's also some other interesting things about this. You notice, let me go, where's that other article? So the other thing about the shadow, I put this other quality of the shadow. So over here, I had some stuff about the Myers-Briggs personality type qualities. But over here in this other part of the slide, there's this other stuff about what characteristics do we project to the outer world. Remember, the persona is not just what tools do we use. The Myers-Briggs chart is about what tools do we use to interact with the outer world and with ourselves. But the persona is also about what qualities do we feel are acceptable or unacceptable. And so remember, the persona is a mask of what many people consider to be positive traits that other people look at us and think are positive or acceptable, and that these are also qualities that we think are positive or acceptable. And it's a mask that is covering up some other stuff underneath. That this is where the conversation gets a little bit more scary and a little bit more disturbing. And it's not just about, what tools do we use to interact with the world, and hey, I can use the Myers-Briggs chart to figure out what job I'm going to have sometime in the future. But a discussion of the shadow really starts to become about what sorts of things are we ashamed of, right? What characteristics do we keep locked up inside ourselves? What sorts of things are we afraid of? Are we ashamed of? Insecurities, times when we're envious or we have anger. And what are the source of these feelings, and what experiences in our past, in our life, have shaped these emotions? So there's stuff locked up inside of us that we don't like. And so many times, Carl Jung talked about this, and other people have talked about this too. Excuse me. That when you look at the persona, you can figure out what the shadow must be by looking at the mirror opposite of the persona. What is this person? Look at the outer image that this person projects to the world, and you can see what the opposite must be that this person has locked up inside themselves. And some of the articles here do an interesting job at talking about that. So I think this is the third page, or the fourth or fifth page of Me and My Shadow, this article by Sally Kempton. And let me go down to the, what is it? I think it's the fourth page here. So, okay, so let's see. Yeah. So she's talking about the shadow in this section. Another way to bring your shadow to light is to look at the people you feel vehemently negative about. When Hillary Clinton was running in the 2008 primary elections, I kept encountering women who would practically froth at the mouth when her name was mentioned. All of them were successful women who had had to make a lot of compromises to rise in male-dominated professions. Hillary, they would say, is ruthless. She's compromised. And sometimes I just hate her. The vehemence alone indicated that there was projection going on. We haven't talked about projection yet, but we'll talk about that term. But the dark qualities they saw in her were unacknowledged aspects of themselves. This also holds true for positive shadow, for the unowned golden qualities in you. The people you idealize for their courage, creativity, wisdom, or charm mirror your own hidden potentials. Think about it. Whom did you idolize in college and why? What qualities and traits make you fall in love with someone? What do you admire about your closest friends? These are clues to your own unexpressed or uncultivated strengths. So, okay. So, the term projection, we haven't gone into that yet, but the term projection basically means, if we can go, I'll just say it really fast. We keep talking about the persona and the shadow. And the shadow is the stuff that we're afraid of, the things that we're angry about, the things that we're ashamed of. And these tend to be things that we're unaware of, or that we're in denial about, or that we are actively trying to suppress. And often what we do, it's a very common human behavior pattern for somebody to have this stuff locked up inside themselves. And what they do is, because it might be too disturbing for the person to face these things inside themselves, it's an easier thing to take these things from inside the self and project it onto other people. So think about, like, for instance, the bully, right, on the playground. This person, what's the persona? The persona of this person is they're a big, strong, scary, powerful looking person, right? That's the outward appearance. But of course, the reason that person is acting like that is because down here in the shadow realms of the subconscious mind, the person is actually the opposite. They're very weak inside. That's why they're working so hard to appear to be so strong on the outside. And what are they doing? They're beating up other kids. And what types of kids do they usually beat up? A bully is going to focus on the kids on the playground that they perceive as being easy targets. They're going to try to identify who are the weakest kids on the playground, and they're going to try to beat up. They're going to try to beat up the weakest kid on the playground. And why are they doing that? It's because they are attacking. I guess you can say, in essence, what they're doing is they're attacking weakness inside themselves. They have inner weakness that they are ashamed of, or that they are ashamed of or unaware of. And what they're doing is they're taking that quality in themselves, and without, remember, this is happening without the human brain being consciously aware that it's happening while it's happening. But they are taking that weak image inside themselves, and they are projecting that image onto somebody else, and then they are attacking that other person, because what they're really doing is they're acting out. They are attacking the thing inside themselves. Right? And it's easier to attack something in somebody else rather than to address that quality inside ourselves. So again, when we look at this article, this author is talking about how they're looking at some aspects of American culture and American politics, and coming to the conclusion that there was some some disturbing subconscious shadow stuff going on that gave rise to a lot of this vehemence against Hillary Clinton. It's one thing to disagree with somebody's political opinions, but these types of comments like she's Hillary Clinton is ruthless, she's compromised, I just hate her. When feelings are that strong, there's something else going on inside the person that is giving rise to that sort of criticism. But then at the same time, this second paragraph, you notice it's interesting. This connects nicely to the clergy example from earlier. In the same way that the shadow is a reflection of these more disturbing things inside ourselves, things that we are unsatisfied with or afraid of or angry about, that's in the shadow in our subconscious mind. And at the same time, this second paragraph, this also holds true for your positive shadow, for the unowned golden qualities in you. Remember, with the Myers-Briggs test, there's a couple of tools that we prefer to use, and we have those other tools, but they tend to be more buried in the subconscious mind and we're not using them. So if you can take the conscious mind and you can try to get to know the subconscious mind and integrate these two halves of yourself better, like the clergy person who spent his life counseling and he suddenly has discovered he's good at accounting. There's all this positive energy that can be released when we discover these new things about ourselves. When we sort of dig these things up out of our subconscious mind and we take the shadow out of the shadow and it becomes a more integrated part of ourselves. In the same way that even this negative stuff, when we identify negative things going on deep inside our minds, which can be difficult, it takes sophistication to do that, and it also takes courage to look at ourselves and to dig those things up and to face them. But if we face those negative things, what am I ashamed of? What am I afraid of? What am I angry about? Then again, overcoming those things, facing those things, and then integrating those things into our conscious mind can release a lot of positive energy, and it causes personal growth. That's what personal growth is. So if I can go back to the PowerPoint again. So I mentioned a little while ago how I took this test and I was an INTJ, and so my mirror image opposite is the ESFP, right? I'm on most of the time, on the surface in my conscious mind, I'm a very intuitive person, spending a lot of time making observations, but then trying to draw larger conclusions to get the big picture. I do a lot of thinking, and I do a lot of planning of large ideas. And I have to admit, there's that stereotype of the absent-minded professor, and I tend to forget things, and my head is in the clouds all the time. The ESFP, I mean, it's like there's this. And I guess I'll open up about something else that I haven't talked about yet. I also came from an abusive situation when I was a kid. I came from a home where things were not good. And so, when I try to get to know myself a little better, there's stuff going on down here in the shadow. I mean, on the surface, I'm a college professor, and so I'm very in charge. I have a lot of authority. But then down here in the shadow, there's some fear, some insecurity, some anger that is left over from those abusive situations that I experienced when I was a kid. And so, up here, I'm an authoritative person in charge, and down here, I'm sort of a little bit more of a, I guess an insecure, fearful, and sometimes angry person. That there are these qualities about me that are buried deep down here in the subconscious mind in my shadow, and so it's like there's these two people, right? There's this mirror image. Up here, I'm this college professor, this intuitive thinking, sort of head in the clouds. Coming up with a larger image of the world, this larger picture of things, and very confident. And then down here, there's this other person, somebody who's a bit more this extroverted sensing type of person who also has some lingering fear and anger and sort of emotional damage left over from this childhood abuse. So it's interesting to do this exercise. And you notice there's this, I wanted you guys to do this exercise here, this letter writing game in the article written by Sally Kempton, Me and My Shadow. And I thought it'd be fun to do this. You notice it's you write 2 letters. Write a letter to someone you dislike. It's interesting. Further down below, she talks about how some people really hated Hillary Clinton. But write a letter to somebody you really don't like and describe the things you dislike about them and why. And then write a second letter. Address the second letter to someone you admire. Write everything that you love and admire about them in detail, again, addressing that person directly. And then there's 4 steps here. Now, I only said do the first step. You don't have to do the other 4. Because remember, this article is actually from, I think it's from some sort of like a yoga meditation magazine. So, so these 4 steps are all about, meditating and doing yoga, which, is great. If you want to meditate and do yoga, go ahead and do it. But, obviously I'm not requiring you to do yoga and meditation for our English comp class. But I do want you to, like on scratch paper, I'm not going to make you turn it in. You don't have to turn it in, okay? But try to spend a little bit of time on this. Get some scratch paper. Also, it is pre-writing for the essay assignment, so you're going to write an essay assignment, and if you do these 2 letters and spend a little bit more time in it, you're going to help yourself generate more ideas for the essay assignment. So spend some time, do some scratch paper, do these 2 letters, and then do this first step right here. Read the letters aloud in front of a mirror, substituting every you with I. In other words, read the letters as though they were addressed to you. Okay. And so it's it's a fun game that you can play that's intended to sort of get you started in uncovering this subconscious stuff going on. It's sort of uncovering your subconscious shadow. When we look at the people that we don't like, or we look at the people that we admire, we can see that there are these qualities that are buried inside of us that we are not addressing, that we're avoiding, or that we're not taking advantage of, that could really cause us to go through some interesting personal growth. So, and in fact, even with me personally, I mentioned some of my personal experience before. This second letter, addressing somebody that you really admire or like, when I started thinking about the people that I really like entertainers or politicians, I noticed that they tended to be, remember, let me go back to the diagram here. When I mentioned that I'm an INTJ and my mirror image is the ESFP, when I thought about the people that I really admire or entertainers that I like to watch, I noticed that they tended to be more like these extroverted sensing types. And so again, it is sort of exposing, whoops, I lost my slide again. Writing that letter to somebody that I admire was sort of exposing these qualities inside myself that I have that are there, but I'm not necessarily capitalizing on them. They're sort of buried deeper down inside myself. So it's a fun, interesting exercise. So spend some time on that. Write the 2 letters, and then go into the bathroom. I understand we're all in our houses. You might not have any privacy, so maybe just do it at your desk. You can do it without speaking out loud or whatever. But try to write the 2 letters and see what happens. And maybe take some notes, and maybe even you might even consider and this is sort of pre-writing for essay 1. You might even consider getting a piece of scratch paper and drawing a line down the middle like this, and start making notes about what you think is going on the surface and what you think is going on underneath. Okay. There's the concepts for Module 1, and we're just starting to talk about pre-writing for getting the essay started. And I'll be talking some more about planning out the ideas for the essay in a couple of days. But try to do the reading, and do the comp questions, and that'll get you started. And then I'll give you some more stuff about how to write the essay in a couple of days. Okay.